Soraya Deen, who is very well known for her human rights activity and including her literature. So I'm not going to go with further details on the author, and I'd like the speakers to hear from her. Floor is yours, Soraya.
Thank you, Feroz, and then also Moise, for the incredible work you and your organization does. We know very clearly that evil prevails when good people do nothing. I am so humbled to be a part of this panel. I've just listened to former Minister Rauf Hakim, and then Shehan Malaka. I got goosebumps listening to you, Shehan, and we are in total shock and offer a deep gratitude for the amount of resilience and courage you are having in your work. To my Christian friends, Catholic friends, it's Ash Wednesday. I want to wish you a happy Ash Wednesday. You know, I am speaking from DC.
Thank you.
So we are here with about 500 faith leaders in DC. We are going to march in about an hour to the White House, where we want to call on the Biden administration to make firmer and stronger commitments to uphold democracy. And this is something we are doing, and I can imagine the level of agitation you have to do in Sri Lanka today. Thomas Jefferson once said, if a law is unjust, a man must not only disobey it, he is obligated to disobey it. He's obligated to disobey it. And I remember last year, we came to you in around this time to intercede in the matter of the government's discriminatory policy that infringed on the religious freedom of Muslims in Sri Lanka. The Muslims were forced to cremate their loved ones. This policy, this law that was violated was the Constitution of Sri Lanka and the international standards on freedom of religion or belief, which we know is embodied in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. This morning, I had a colleague distraught. She sent me a text informing me about the demolition of structures within the Muslim mosque and shrine of Jailani in Balangoda and the inactivity of the government. In this context, in this scenario, we are talking about a law that is arbitrary and draconian. In a speech delivered on Independence Day, February 4th, the President, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, talked about responsibilities of the citizens. What he didn't talk about was the responsibilities of his government. How can we citizens of Sri Lanka rise to the majestic heights of our best self when the government has laws like the Prevention of Terrorism Act that desecrates our democracy, robs us of our liberties, human rights, and dignity? I oppose the PTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, because I have a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I oppose the PTA because I love Sri Lanka. I speak out against this not in anger, but in great disappointment, in anxiety and sorrow in my heart. I speak against it because I want to see our beloved country stand as a powerful example to the world, as a country that models compassion and kindness, karuna and metta. As a Muslim woman, it is not my intention to remind Buddhist concepts to the elected Buddhist leaders. But I'm saddened to see that much of the Buddhism we see in Sri Lanka today is confined to offering flowers, building temples and statues, and propping up certain extremist Buddhist clergy as they prop up the government. 43 years ago, the Prevention of Terrorism Act was enacted. It came as a tool that would provide safety from terrorists. It came as a tool that would provide security to the people. Today, it provides cover to a lawless government. It has become a tool to terrorize the people, the dissidents, and the minorities. Our appeals, my friends, will go down as the greatest collaboration between the people in the history of our nation. The cry to repeal this appeal is unanimous. Even as we gather and speak here today, petitions are being signed by all communities all over the island. How can a law prevent terrorism? Is the government delusional? As an activist with over 15 years working in the area of preventing violence and terrorism, I can assert to you only good policies, good strategies, and good governance and a robust partnership between the government and the people can deter terrorism and foil a terror plot, not draconian laws such as the Prevention of Terrorism Act. 73 years after independence and 43 years after the inaction of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, Sri Lanka is not free. My battery is low. I am in a hotel. Sri Lanka is not free. Sri Lankan's life is still sadly crippled by the manacles of the government's punitive and arbitrary arrest and the discrimination against people who are activists, journalists, and minority religious groups. The government wants us to live in fear and thrive in division. The PTA is a chokehold. An ordinary citizen's life can in a moment be crippled, like you heard the account of our brother Shehan Malakan. I want to talk about 3 reasons why we must oppose the PTA. One, it is a threat to our democracy. It gives security forces sweeping powers to arrest and imprison suspects. Already, we have thousands of prisoners in custody without being charged or indicted. They are hindered. There are more who are on a watch list, even as we speak. Secondly, it is a violation of human rights, arbitrary and indefinite deprivation of liberty of individual groups and individuals based on ill-defined activities. Incarceration is a way to pretend to solve the problem of crime, maintaining the endless cycle violence in our culture. I oppose the Prevention of Terrorism Act because it creates unprecedented hardship to women and children. Children of incarcerated parents have lowest self-esteem and they have depression. They withdraw from friends and family. It wastes away the talent of an entire generation. And Sri Lanka, we can't afford to do this. The women's plight is altered with limited or no access to economic resources. Ladies and gentlemen, in Sri Lanka, we have a word called lajja. I'm ashamed. Today, as an international activist, sometimes working within Sri Lanka and observing from outside, today I'm ashamed at how the PTA was used to punish Mr. Hijaz Hizbullah, a lawyer who defended the constitution when a constitutional coup was underway. The responders to that case is very important to know. The responders to that case is the current prime minister and a former president. Hijaz was held in custody for 2 years with no clear indictment being served. Months later, after an amended indictment was served, his trial began. The Attorney General agreed to bail. The prosecutor did not object to bail, but the bail was denied on the ground that the trial had begun. Even murderers are granted bail under the general criminal laws in Sri Lanka. So you see how repressive, how abusive this law is. It detains innocent citizens indefinitely and held without being produced before a judge. Lajja. I'm ashamed as the world watched us display a callous disregard to due process, human rights, and justice. The PTA was enacted 43 years ago with the intent to curb insurgency and terrorism. Using this law in a time of peace against ordinary citizens is reprehensible and unacceptable in a civilized world. And today, I am sadly tasked to highlight this shameful condition to you. The government has defaulted in innumerable ways to honor its promise to protect the people. How can a country think it is business as usual when over 1,500 people are languishing in jail, not knowing, not being told why they are in custody? But we refuse to believe that the government of Sri Lanka cannot do better. We want to remind the government of Sri Lanka to face the urgency of now. We want the government to remind the government of Sri Lanka the urgency of now, to face it. Now is the time to make real promise of democracy, a real promise, not one that appeases international scrutiny and accountability. It would be hypocritical and negligent for our country to overlook the urgency of this moment, because the discontent of the people will not pass until this draconian law is repealed. Now is the time for the government to act. The people are discontent and growing bitter. Their creative protests and struggles to repeal this law must not be built on hatred for the country. The president on 4th February called on the people to be exemplary citizens. He called on us to fulfill our responsibilities to be proud citizens. He said, Abhimanavat Puravasio. He said we should be optimistic. We should have optimistic ideas. He said, Subhavadi Adahas. We can never be proud, Mr. President, as long as there's unjust laws that promote unspeakable suffering to people and families. We can never be proud citizens when subjected to police brutality, harassed and illegally detained. And we can never be proud citizens as long as our freedoms are not protected, our dignity robbed, and our families are torn apart. Even as I speak, some of our brothers are languishing and listening from their jail cells, not knowing their fate, somehow knowing that the situation can and must be changed because we speak up. How can we forget the women and mothers and the daughters and the sons and the uncles and the parents and the fathers who have not seen their children? In 2018, I was in Jaffna working with a group of courageous women, training them on how to build power and organize the community for action. Several of the women shared heartbreaking stories of their husbands and brothers now in custody. They did not know why. They had no clue. They were looking at fear and despair in their face. They're living through this horror while single-handedly raising their children, feeding them, and earning a meager income. Our government, sadly, continues to be morally bankrupt, failing to address the pressing issues of our time. For far too long, we have forgotten and discounted the suffering of the women and the mothers and the daughters and the sons. This vicious disregard for our citizens must end. The international world must urge the government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to make democracy and human rights a consistent priority. These rights and our democracy are not tokens. They are not tokens. They are not promises to be made to appease the international community. It is time to call for a moratorium on the use of the PTA, a clear time frame to be set to review and repeal the law. This is the faith that you and we will have to continue to work with. 3 years ago, my friends, I was working on a mayor's task force on homelessness. I'm sure everyone here feels strongly about homelessness. Everyone is concerned and some may even want to help solve the problem. I was talking to a woman who had just received a home, and I asked her what it meant for her to have a roof over her head. And she said to me that she will not be raped that night and she will not be raped in the future. That woman's confession was a defining moment in my activism. After that day, I cannot go to bed without thinking of the women who are homeless on the streets. I say this story because I want every one of you to build that level of empathy for the marginalized people who are in custody under the PTA. I want you to step into the shoes of those who are incarcerated for years, not knowing why they are even there. I want you to think about being arbitrarily taken into custody because you said or did something the political leaders did not approve. I want you to understand the gravity of your arrest and the detention and the police seeking to admit into evidence a statement you may never have made. I want you to step into your shoes, the shoes of activists like me, community leaders like Shehan, politicians of the opposition. and understand the fear and uncertainty we experience to voice our opinions, to hold the government accountable, and to organize when we organize a protest or march. I want you to understand our fear. It is not enough for us to say repeal the PTA. We must concentrate not merely on the negative expulsion of the PTA, but I call on you to also concentrate on the positive affirmation of fair and just laws. Where we see wrong or injustice, we must speak. This is our country. This is our democracy. We must protect it. We must preserve it, and we must pass it on. The road will be tough, my friends, but we are on it. Thank you.